Next up, we have Brendan. Brendan is one of the two co-founders of Something We Love, which is Manitoba's first worker cooperative game studio. That's pretty cool. Something We Love develops narrative-focused games as well as whimsical games with light mechanics. Brendan has been in the video games industry for more than a decade and has previously worked at both Complex Games and Ubisoft. Welcome, Brendan. I think you can use the arrow key for the buttons.
Okay. Thank you, June. And hello, everyone. So, yeah, you already got my introduction, but wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, and specifically in the context of this talk. I've used a lot of open source tools for my career. Less while I was doing work at Complex Games and Ubisoft, and a bit more now. But you know, it's even more recently, for obvious reasons, for people who are upset with Unity. So I'll just go ahead and get into this. Open source software, the way I will define it, is where if you have the skills, you can go in and change it and to suit your own needs. It's not hidden from you. Generally, it's free. There are, paid open source software, but I will only consider them among the ranks if you can at least change it to suit your needs. And there's different sort of grades of it. Some of it's hobby work. There's a lot of really cool hobby projects out there that you may find useful. Even though someone just did it in their free time, it may be useful for you. Some of it is extremely serious business, like health and safety critical stuff. A lot of times that's open source because it needs to be examined. So it's really important to be able to validate that this tool is doing what it says it does. And then other times it's also extremely corporate. Some of you may know Facebook has its fingers into some open source stuff. And Google too. So there are some good reasons to pay attention to this. As people in a creative industry, it's important to keep track of the skills you're developing. Not to say that there's not a good reason to, use proprietary closed source software. There's definitely a way to build a career around that. But it's important to be aware of the risks and opportunities. So make sure you're going into it informed and be aware that there may be alternatives. Because if it's open source, then you have a bit more control. And it's also important to keep track of, for open source and for proprietary software, who can ruin your day and who can solve your problems. So vendor lock. This is a thing I've personally experienced. I've got a lot of experience with Unity, but I just, I use it still, but maybe not for much longer, because vendor lock is a trap. And you know how this goes. A lot of times, if you're learning these skills in university, it might be taught on a specific platform. So, they give good deals to educational institutions. And like I said, sometimes you can build a career out of that. So, more power to you if it's affordable and it gets you the career you want. But you're going to have to keep paying. And other times, they might really ruin your day, because if you've put all of your skills into the basket of some nut job who's running a company, yeah. That's why we're all here and angry now. But I encourage you to become an indomitable creator. That's something that open source tools can do for you, because you can change them and it's running on, your hardware Hopefully it's not running on a cloud. No one can stop you. You can be as creative as you want. No one's going to be able to put an end to this unimaginable power. So I'll go, now that I've gotten my preachy bit out of the way, I'll tell you all the useful stuff. Blender. It's been mentioned already in a previous talk, but fantastic 3D platform. It really does more than you'd think. It's a little bit crazy. You can use it for video editing. Modeling is what I've used it for successfully. Even though I should mention my career skill set has leaned more towards programming. I do a bit of shader programming, and I only do modeling when I absolutely have to. Krita is open source and free. It's fantastic for doing illustrative style paintings. It's got sort of a Photoshop style interface. Inkscape is fantastic. It's a pretty different skill set doing Inkscape compared to something like Krita. But if you're trying to get really clean designs for UI elements, or if you have, I think it's Adobe Illustrator experience, it'll be intuitive. It's vectors. Inkscape's an older, it's been around for a long time, continuously improved. It's great. I've written extensions for it. If you want to know how to get a vector shape from Inkscape into a signed distance field in Godot, I'm the guy to talk to. This is an interesting one. Tenacity is what I consider the successor to Audacity. Audacity might be familiar to some of you as a free open source audio editing tool, but a peculiar thing happened to Audacity. I mentioned before that open source software can sometimes be corporate. Audacity didn't start out that way, but it became corporate. It got taken over by someone who wanted to monetize its installer base by the only way they could think of, which is to put spyware in it. So that's really gross, but it's open source, so it was discovered and they forked it. So Tenacity is a fork. And this is the one I recommend now. It's got all the features you need from Audacity, and it doesn't have spyware in it. And of course, Godot. At Something We Love, this is now our engine of choice. I don't know if I really need to say more. Matt said plenty. It's a fantastic engine. I think it's definitely Game Jam ready. And I think a lot of us will be trying it maybe for the first time at this Game Jam, but there's, a community around you. Feel free to ask. Oh, I gotta go back because it's like 30 megabytes for a game engine. That's fantastic. It's just about my favorite feature. And there's a ton more. Open source projects generally, I can't list them, but these are some that I've actually used for game development. So RenPy does visual novels. TIC80 is a little bit like Pico 8. It's a virtual machine thing where you can make games in it. LMMS is a tracker sequencer thing. So if you're using Tenacity for modifying audio clips, you can use LMMS for making music. Twine and Ink are both great for writing interactive stories. And I've done a talk previously about Varvara UXN. That's a little bit like TIC80 again. It's a virtual platform that you can make games within. The goals for that one are a bit different, though. It's not just trying to be retro or anything like that. It's got its own agenda. And then Visual Studio Code, I think, is an interesting thing to mention. It has this is the way some corporate open source projects work. They've got a core of it that's open source that they put important feature development into. So that's the way Chrome works, for example. It's the same thing with Visual Studio Code. There's an open source base, and then they put a corporate wrapper around it, and they deliver it to the masses. And then operating systems, Linux, and file versioning with Git. That's I've used Git for a super long time. I don't know if I would recommend it to anyone. Like, go into a game jam, start using Git. That's maybe a tall order, but if you've got Linux experience or command line experience, maybe. So I've sort of been telling a few stories along the way about these tools, and that's because I think there's some things to know about how to get the most out of open source software. Learning how the projects are managed. So, like that deal with Audacity becoming corrupted with spyware, they didn't have a good governing body. An organization like the Blender Foundation, they've been managing Blender for a really long time, and they've been trying to make sure it is a useful tool for the industry that uses it. So I trust them pretty well. I do not trust Google or Facebook. They, are trying to make sometimes useful tools, but they're also interested in turning you into a product. So be careful about that. If you want to, learn how that process works, there's folks like Cory Doctorow, who has talked at length about the process of enshittification, which is basically how they turn a thing that you get used to enjoying into something that's gradually worse but makes them money. So that's kind of the main thing, but if you want to go a level deeper, learning how to modify and contribute or participate in the governance of these projects. If the tool's not doing everything you need, you can, with a bit of effort, sometimes make it yourself and share it with everyone. The community really loves when you do that. If you're not used to coding in a project like that, they might make you go back and, conform to their standards back and forth, but they'll help you if it's a well-managed organization. But also just participating in the communities is really important. Like, Blender doesn't get all of its features because it's what the programmers want. It's because it's what the users want. It's what the industry wants. So the more of us that are out there, the better. There we go. So thanks, everyone.